Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. We're thankful for your continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Discovery. The sterile white walls of St. Mary's Hospital had become my second home over the past 3 weeks. My wife, Brielle, lay in bed 304, her left leg elevated in traction, her face a carefully constructed mask of pain and vulnerability. She'd been here since her accident, a tragic fall down our basement stairs that resulted in a compound fracture and what the doctors called severe psychological trauma. I was Derek Holloway, 42 years old, owner of 3 successful auto repair shops across the city. 20 years of marriage had taught me to read people like I read engine diagnostics. Every sound, every hesitation, every inconsistency told a story. And Brielle's story had more holes than a rusted exhaust pipe. My 12-year-old son, Connor, fidgeted beside me as we entered the room for our evening visit. Brielle's face lit up with what I now recognized as practiced maternal warmth. "My boys," she exclaimed, reaching out with arms that trembled just enough to sell the performance. "I missed you so much." Connor rushed to her bedside, and I watched as she winced. Perfectly timed, perfectly executed. 3 weeks of this charade, and she hadn't missed a beat. But I had been watching, learning, planning. "How are you feeling today, honey?" I asked, my voice carrying the concerned husband tone I perfected. "Better, I think. Dr. Morrison says the bone is healing nicely, but..." She let her voice trail off, her eyes misting over. "I keep having these nightmares about falling. Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever feel safe in our own home again." Connor squeezed her hand. "It's okay, Mom. Dad's making the basement super safe. He's been working on it every night." Brielle's eyes flicked to mine, a micro-expression of concern crossing her features. She didn't know about my basement renovations because she didn't know I knew the truth. The basement where she'd never actually fallen. The basement where I'd found traces of her real activities. "That's very thoughtful of your father," she said carefully. As Connor chattered about his day at school, I studied the room with new eyes. After 3 weeks of visits, I knew every detail. The way the afternoon light hit the window, the position of every piece of equipment, the sight lines from the hallway. Most importantly, I knew about the space beneath the bed. "Daddy, I dropped my phone," Connor suddenly announced, looking under the bed. His voice changed, becoming smaller, scared. "Daddy, there's something weird under here." I moved to his side, my heart rate steady despite the moment I'd been anticipating. There, partially hidden beneath the bed frame, was a small digital recorder, the kind private investigators use for surveillance. But this wasn't surveillance equipment. I planted it there myself, part of a much larger web I'd been weaving. "What is it, Dad?" Connor whispered, his young voice carrying genuine fear. I palmed the device quickly, my expression shifting to one of concern and confusion. "I don't know, son, but I think we need to call someone about this." Brielle's face had gone pale, her act momentarily forgotten. "Derek, what?" "Stay calm, honey," I said, already reaching for my phone. "This might be related to, well, we need to be safe." I dialed 911, putting on my best worried husband voice. "Yes, I need to report something suspicious at St. Mary's Hospital. My wife is a patient here, and my son just found what appears to be recording equipment under her bed. Room 304. The operator's voice was crisp and professional. "Sir, we're dispatching an officer immediately. Please don't touch anything else and remain in the room." As I hung up, Brielle grabbed my arm. "Derek, what if someone's been watching me, recording me?" Her voice cracked with what sounded like genuine fear, but I knew better. She was afraid. "All right, just nodded the recorder." "It's going to be okay," I assured her, covering her hand with mine. "The police will figure this out." Connor pressed closer to me, and I put my arm around him. My son had no idea he just set the first domino falling in a carefully orchestrated sequence that would end with justice. My kind of justice. 20 minutes later, Officer Patricia Voss arrived. She was young but thorough, asking all the right questions while examining the recorder with latex gloves. After documenting everything and taking our statements, she bagged the device as evidence. "Mr. Holloway," she said, pulling me aside, "this is definitely surveillance equipment. High-end stuff. We'll have our tech team examine it, but I have to ask, is there anyone who might want to spy on your wife? Any threats, suspicious people, anything unusual lately?" I let my expression darken with protective anger. "Officer, 3 weeks ago my wife had a terrible accident. She's been through enough without someone violating her privacy like this. I want whoever did this caught. We'll do everything we can, sir. In the meantime, I'd recommend requesting a room change and perhaps considering private security." After Officer Voss left, I sat beside Brielle's bed, holding her hand while Connor played on his tablet nearby. She was quieter now, lost in thought. She didn't know that the recorder contained conversations between her and her lover, Dr. Reed Morrison, her attending physician and the man she'd been having an affair with for 8 months. She also didn't know that I'd been recording them for weeks, gathering evidence not for divorce court, but for something far more permanent. Brielle had made the mistake of thinking she was smarter than me, and Dr. Morrison had made the mistake of believing he could play God with other people's lives. "Derek," Brielle whispered, squeezing my hand, "what if whoever planted that thing comes back?" I squeezed back, my voice gentle but my eyes hard. "Don't worry, sweetheart. I'll make sure no one ever hurts you again." As I spoke those words, I thought about the basement renovations Connor had mentioned, modifications that had nothing to do with safety and everything to do with justice. The same basement where Brielle claimed to have fallen, where I'd actually discovered evidence of her deception, and where very soon she and Dr. Morrison would face the consequences of their betrayal. The first piece was in play. Officer Voss would analyze the recorder, find the incriminating conversations, and begin connecting dots I'd carefully laid out for her to find. What she wouldn't realize was that she was working my case, following my evidence, moving toward my desired conclusion. I looked at my wife's worried face and felt nothing but cold satisfaction. She taught me that love was weakness, trust was foolishness, and family was just another word for people who could hurt you most. Now I was going to teach her that Derek Holloway was nobody's fool, and some lessons were permanent. Chapter 2. The Surgeon's Secret. Dr. Reed Morrison prided himself on steady hands and nerves of steel. At 38, he was one of the youngest orthopedic surgeons at St. Mary's, with a reputation for fixing what others deemed unfixable. His colleagues respected him, his patients trusted him, and until 8 months ago, he believed he was untouchable. That was before Brielle Holloway walked into his office with a sports injury that had obviously never happened. She'd been beautiful, vulnerable, and married, exactly the kind of dangerous distraction he should have avoided. Instead, he'd made the mistake of his life. Now, as he walked through the hospital corridors after learning about the recording device, Reed felt his carefully constructed world beginning to crack. The device had been found just hours after their planned meeting in the supply closet had been interrupted by an emergency surgery. Coincidence? He'd stopped believing in those months ago. Reed's background wasn't the pristine success story his colleagues imagined. Growing up in Detroit's roughest neighborhoods, he'd learned early that survival meant being smarter, faster, and more ruthless than everyone around you. Medical school had been his escape, but the streets had never really left him. That edge had served him well in surgery, where split-second decisions meant life or death. It had served him less well in personal relationships. He'd been married once, to a fellow doctor who discovered his tendency toward narcissism and control. The divorce had been ugly but quiet. She'd taken her settlement and moved to Seattle, taking their daughter with her. Reed had told himself he was better off alone, focusing on his career, until Brielle had made him remember what he'd been missing. The affair had started professionally enough. Brielle had come to him complaining of chronic back pain, describing symptoms that didn't match any objective findings. Most doctors would have sent her to a psychiatrist or discharged her with pain medication. Reed had seen through her immediately. She was lonely, looking for attention, trapped in a marriage to a man she described as emotionally distant and controlling. He should have maintained professional boundaries. Instead, he found himself scheduling unnecessary follow-up appointments, spending extra time with her, eventually meeting her for coffee to discuss her treatment options. The first kiss had happened in his office after hours. The first time they'd slept together had been in his apartment 3 weeks later. The relationship had been intoxicating and dangerous. Brielle was passionate, spontaneous, everything his ex-wife hadn't been. She made him feel powerful, desired, alive in ways he'd forgotten were possible. But she'd also been reckless, pushing for them to meet at the hospital, in supply closets, even suggesting they go away together for weekends. Rita tried to maintain some semblance of caution, but Brielle had a way of making his careful plan seem cowardly. When she proposed the accident scheme, he'd initially refused. The plan was insane. Fake a fall, check herself into the hospital under his care, use her recovery time to plan their future together while her husband played the dutiful visitor. He'll never suspect, she'd argued. Derek's smart with engines, but he's clueless about people. In this way, we can be together every day without anyone questioning it. I'll be your patient, you'll be my doctor, and he'll pay for my hospital room while we plan our escape. The scheme had required Reed to falsify medical records, coordinate with radiology to create convincing X-rays of a fracture that didn't exist, and maintain an elaborate fiction with his colleagues. He justified it by telling himself they were just buying time to figure out how to leave their respective situations cleanly. But 3 weeks in, Reed was beginning to suspect they weren't as clever as they'd thought. There had been small things, security cameras that seemed newly positioned, maintenance workers who appeared in odd places, conversations that felt like they were being overheard. And now the recording device. His phone buzzed with a text from Brielle. "We need to talk. Something's wrong." Reed deleted the message and tried to focus on his rounds, but his hands were shaking slightly as he reviewed patient charts. In surgery, trembling hands could kill someone. In life, they were just a sign that everything was falling apart. That evening, he found an excuse to check on Brielle during visiting hours, timing his arrival for when her family usually went to dinner. But when he entered her room, Derek Holloway was still there, sitting in the visitor's chair like he owned it. "Dr. Morrison," Derek said, standing to shake hands. "Perfect timing. I want to thank you again for taking such good care of my wife." Reed forced a smile, noting how Derek's grip lingered just a moment too long, how his eyes never left Reed's face. "Just doing my job, Mr. Holloway. How are you holding up? This has been difficult for your whole family." "We're managing," Derek replied. "Though I have to admit, finding that recording device has me concerned. Someone was obviously targeting Brielle specifically. Any idea who might want to spy on one of your patients?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Reed felt sweat gathering at his collar despite the hospital's air conditioning. "It's disturbing. Hospital security is investigating, of course. We take patient privacy very seriously." "I'm sure you do," Derek said. "Brielle speaks so highly of you. She says you've been very attentive." Reed's medical training kicked in, helping him maintain composure even as alarm bells rang in his head. "I try to provide comprehensive care. Recovery from this type of injury requires both physical and emotional support." "Exactly what I'd expect from someone with your reputation," Derek continued. "I've been asking around about you, doctor. Everyone says you're very dedicated. Sometimes you work late into the night, I hear." "Medicine is demanding," Reed managed. Derek nodded thoughtfully. "I imagine it is. Well, I should let you examine your patient. I'll just be down in the cafeteria if you need anything." After Derek left, Reed approached Brielle's bed with growing dread. She grabbed his hand immediately, pulling him closer. "He knows," she whispered urgently. "I don't know how, but he knows. You're being paranoid." The recorder wasn't random, Reed. Someone planted it there specifically. Someone who knew we'd be talking. And the way Derek was looking at you just now. Reed had seen that look too. It wasn't the confused concern of a worried husband. It was the calculating stare of a predator who'd cornered his prey. "Even if he suspects something, he can't prove anything," Reed said, but his voice lacked conviction. "You don't understand," Brielle said, her grip tightening on his hand. "Derek isn't like other men. He doesn't forgive, ever. In 20 years of marriage, I've never seen him let anything slide. If he knows about us..." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying we need to disappear. Tonight. I'll check myself out AMA. We'll take my car, and we'll drive until we hit Canada or Mexico. Reed stared at her, realizing for the first time that he was looking at someone who was genuinely terrified. Not of discovery, not of divorce, but of her husband. Brielle, you're talking about abandoning everything. Better than being dead, she cut him off. You don't know Derek like I do. He's not just going to file for divorce and move on. He's going to destroy us both, and he's going to enjoy every minute of it. As if summoned by their conversation, Derek appeared in the doorway again, holding 2 cups of coffee. Sorry, forgot to ask if you wanted anything, Dr. Morrison. Coffee? I got extra. Reed's mouth felt like sand. No, thank you. I should check on my other patients. Of course. Don't let us keep you. As Reed left the room, he heard Derek's voice, warm and conversational. Honey, I've been thinking. Maybe it's time you came home. The basement renovations are almost finished, and I think you'd be much more comfortable in familiar surroundings. Reed didn't wait to hear Brielle's response. He walked quickly toward the elevator, his mind racing. Brielle was right. They needed a run. But as the elevator doors closed, he caught sight of Derek Holloway watching him from the hallway and realized that running might already be too late. The predator had been hunting them all along, and they'd been too blinded by their own desires to see the trap closing around them. Chapter 3. The Web Titans. Detective Luis Santiago had seen enough domestic cases to know that the most dangerous moment in any marriage wasn't when the fighting started. It was when it stopped. The Holloway case had landed on his desk when the hospital surveillance equipment was processed, revealing not just the planted recorder, but something far more interesting: the recorded conversations between Brielle Holloway and Dr. Reed Morrison. 23 years on the force had taught Santiago to recognize patterns. The suspicious recording device, the convenient discovery by the child, the husband's almost theatrical concern, it all felt orchestrated. But orchestrated by whom and why? Santiago reviewed the files in his cramped office, surrounded by cold coffee and the accumulated paperwork of too many late nights. Derek Holloway owned 3 successful auto shops, paid his taxes, had no criminal record. A model citizen whose wife had suffered a tragic accident and was now apparently the victim of illegal surveillance. But something nagged at Santiago. He'd requested the original accident report from 3 weeks ago, and the details were odd. No witnesses to the fall, no emergency call until hours later, and medical evidence that was somehow both conclusive and suspicious. The fracture was real, but the circumstances felt manufactured. His phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. Santiago. Detective, this is Officer Voss. I got an update on the Holloway surveillance case. Go ahead. I ran background checks on everyone with access to the patient's room. Dr. Morrison has some interesting history, divorce, custody issues, and get this. His ex-wife filed a restraining order 2 years ago. Claims he was obsessively controlling and exhibited predatory behavior. Santiago made notes. What about the recordings? Any progress on the content? That's where it gets interesting. The conversations between Mrs. Holloway and Dr. Morrison, they're not what you'd expect between a doctor and patient. Very intimate, discussing plans to leave together, references to their relationship. But here's the weird part. Some of the conversations reference things that don't make sense. Such as, Mrs. Holloway mentions being afraid of her husband finding out about what really happened in the basement. But according to her medical records, she fell down the basement stairs. Why would she be afraid of him finding out about her own accident? Santiago felt the familiar tingle of a case about to break open. I need to see those recordings. I want to talk to both Dr. Morrison and Mr. Holloway. Separately. An hour later, Santiago sat across from Reed Morrison in the hospital's administrative conference room. The surgeon was nervous, his usual confidence replaced by fidgety energy. Dr. Morrison, I need to ask you about your relationship with Brielle Holloway. She's my patient. I'm treating her for injuries sustained in a fall. According to the recordings we recovered, your relationship goes beyond professional boundaries. Reed's composure cracked. Those recordings were obtained illegally. They can't be used. Doctor, I'm not building a court case right now. I'm trying to understand what's happening here. A surveillance device was planted in your patient's room, and the recordings suggest you two are having an affair. That puts you both at risk. Santiago watched Reed's face carefully. Fear, guilt, and something else, desperation. Are you afraid of someone, Dr. Morrison? This is complicated. Uncomplicated. Reed ran his hands through his hair. Brielle and I. Yes, we become close. But her husband. Detective, I think he's been watching us. Following us. There have been incidents. What kind of incidents? Strange cars parked outside my apartment building. Phone calls with no one there. Maintenance issues at the hospital that seem to happen whenever Brielle and I are together. And yesterday, someone broke into my office. Nothing was stolen, but my files were definitely searched. Santiago made more notes. Why didn't you report this? Because I thought I was being paranoid. Because reporting it would expose my relationship with Brielle. Because... Reed's voice dropped. Because I'm starting to think Derek Holloway is much more dangerous than he appears. 2 hours later, Santiago was sitting in Derek Holloway's auto shop, watching the man work on an engine with methodical precision. Everything about Derek suggested competence and control, clean workspace, organized tools, efficient movements. Mr. Holloway, thank you for meeting with me. Derek looked up, wiping his hands on a clean cloth. Of course, detective. Anything to help catch whoever's been stalking my wife. The surveillance equipment recovered from your wife's room contains some disturbing recordings. Conversations between your wife and Dr. Morrison that suggest an inappropriate relationship. Santiago watched Derek's reaction carefully. Most betrayed husbands would show anger, shock, pain, something. Derek's expression never changed. I see, Derek said calmly. That would explain a lot. You don't seem surprised. Detective, I've been married for 20 years. I pay attention. I knew something was wrong, but hearing it confirmed still hurts. Derek's voice carried just the right note of pain, but his eyes remained cold. What did you know exactly? Brielle's been different since her accident. Secretive, defensive when I asked about her treatment. Dr. Morrison seemed overly invested in her case. But I told myself I was being paranoid, that I should trust my wife. Derek shook his head sadly. I guess I was wrong to trust anyone. Santiago felt the conversation slipping away from him. Derek was saying all the right things, showing appropriate emotions, but something felt rehearsed. Mr. Holloway, where were you on the evening your wife fell down the stairs? At my North Side shop. We had a rush job, classic Mustang restoration that the customer needed finished. I have security footage, time cards, receipts. What? Just covering all the bases. Sometimes domestic situations can escalate. Derek's expression hardened slightly. Detective, are you suggesting I would hurt my wife? I'm not suggesting anything. I'm investigating. Then investigate Dr. Morrison. He's the one who's been manipulating my wife, taking advantage of her vulnerability, abusing his position of trust. If someone planted that recorder, maybe it was him, try to document their affair for some reason. Santiago considered this angle. It was possible Morrison had planted the device himself, perhaps to blackmail Brielle or document their relationship for his own protection. But it didn't explain the content of the recordings, which seemed to implicate both of them in something beyond simple adultery. I'll be investigating all possibilities, Santiago said. In the meantime, I'd recommend caution. Affairs can lead to dangerous situations, especially when discovery is involved. Derek nodded solemnly. I appreciate your concern, detective. I just want my family to be safe. As Santiago left the auto shop, he felt more confused than when he'd arrived. Derek Holloway was either the most understanding betrayed husband in history, or he was playing a game far more complex than anyone realized. Back at the station, Santiago reviewed the case files again, looking for patterns. The timing was bothering him. The recorder had been found just as the affair seemed to be reaching a crisis point. Brielle's recorded conversations suggested she wanted to leave with Morrison immediately, while Morrison seemed reluctant to abandon his career. But there was something else in the recordings, something Officer Voss had mentioned but not fully explored. References to what really happened in the basement, and Brielle's fear of her husband discovering the truth. If she'd actually fallen down the stairs, what truth was there to discover? Santiago picked up his phone and dialed the forensics lab. This is Detective Santiago. I need you to re-examine the Brielle Holloway medical evidence. I want to know if that basement fall could have happened the way it was reported. While he waited for the forensics review, Santiago pulled up Derek Holloway's business records. 3 auto shops, all profitable, all clean. But successful businessmen were often successful because they understood systems, logistics, planning. They understood how to manipulate variables to achieve desired outcomes. And if Derek Holloway had been planning something for 8 months, if he'd known about the affair all along and been gathering evidence, building a case, preparing for revenge, then everyone involved was dancing to his tune without realizing it. Santiago's phone rang with the forensics results, and what he heard made his blood run cold. The investigation was about to take a very dark turn, and he was beginning to suspect that Derek Holloway wasn't the victim in this case. He was the architect of something much more sinister. The web was tightening, but not around the people anyone expected. Chapter 4. The Reckoning Begins. The forensics report landed on Santiago's desk like a bomb. Dr. Patricia Chun, the department's forensic pathologist, had found inconsistencies in Brielle Holloway's injuries that raised serious questions about the circumstances of her accident. The fracture pattern is wrong, Dr. Chun explained over the phone. Falls downstairs typically create spiral fractures or fractures at the ankle or wrist from people trying to break their fall. Mrs. Holloway's injury is a clean transverse fracture of the tibia, consistent with direct impact from a blunt object. Santiago felt pieces clicking into place. Could have been self-inflicted? Possible, but unlikely. The force required would cause anyone to pass out from pain. More likely, someone else inflicted the injury while the victim was restrained or unconscious. How long ago? Based on the healing progression, exactly 3 weeks, which matches the timeline of her hospital admission. Santiago hung up and immediately called for backup. Whatever game Derek Holloway was playing, it had moved beyond surveillance and adultery into assault and false imprisonment. But as he prepared to make arrests, his phone rang again. Detective Santiago, this is Dr. Morrison. I need to see you immediately. It's about Brielle and her husband. I think we're all in danger. An hour later, Reed Morrison sat in Santiago's office, his usual composure completely shattered. His hand shook as he lit his 3rd cigarette in 10 minutes. He's been planning this for months, Reed said. Maybe longer. Everything that's happened, the affair, the accident, even us getting caught, it's all been orchestrated. Start from the beginning. Reed took a shaky drag. 8 months ago, Brielle came to my office. She was beautiful, vulnerable, said she was trapped in an unhappy marriage. I should have seen it, but I was lonely, and she was magnetic. The affair started naturally, or so I thought. What changed your mind? Little things. She always knew exactly what to say to push my buttons, to make me take more risks. She suggested we meet at the hospital, in supply closets, places where we could easily be caught. When I hesitated, she'd question my commitment, make me feel like a coward. Santiago made notes. Go on. Then came the accident idea. She said it was spontaneous, but now I realize she'd thought it through completely. She knew exactly which injury would require extended hospitalization, which doctor would be assigned to her case, how to work the system. You're saying she planned her own injury? No. Reed's voice dropped to a whisper. I'm saying her husband planned it. She was as much a victim as I was. Santiago felt his understanding of the case shift again. Explain. Last night, after you questioned me, I went to see Brielle. She was terrified, more frightened than I'd ever seen her. She told me Derek had been planning something for months, that she'd discovered evidence, but thought she could manage him. Reed stubbed out his cigarette and immediately lit another. She said Derek found out about the affair almost immediately. Instead of confronting us, he started manipulating the situation. He encouraged her to see me more often, even suggested she might need ongoing medical care. He was feeding our relationship, making it easier for us to meet. Why would he do that? Because he wanted evidence. Detailed, documented proof of every aspect of our betrayal. But more than that, he wanted us to become dependent on the arrangement, to get careless, to dig ourselves in so deep we couldn't climb out. Santiago reviewed his notes from the Derek Holloway interview. The man's calm reaction to learning about the affair suddenly made more sense. He'd known all along. The basement, Reed continued. Brielle told me Derek's been renovating their basement for months. New soundproofing, reinforced doors, security systems. She thought he was creating a home office, but now what? She thinks he's built a prison. Somewhere he can take us where no one will hear us scream. Santiago felt a chill. Where's Mrs. Holloway now? That's why I'm here. Derek convinced her to check out of the hospital this morning. Said she'd be more comfortable recovering at home. The doctors protested. Her leg isn't ready for discharge, but Derek had all the right forms, knew all the right procedures. And you let her go? Reed's face crumbled. She begged me to help her, but what could I do? If I'd interfered, it would have confirmed Derek's suspicions. She said she'd find a way to contact me, that we'd figure out an escape plan. But detective, that was 8 hours ago, and I haven't heard anything. Santiago was already reaching for his radio when Reed grabbed his arm. There's more. After Brielle left, I went to my apartment to pack. I was going to disappear, start over somewhere else. But Derek was waiting for me. He threatened you? Worse, he offered me a choice. Reed's voice became barely audible. He said I could walk away right now, leave town, never contact Brielle again, and he'd let me live. Or I could try to play hero, in which case he'd destroy me completely. My career, my reputation, my life. What did you tell him? I told him I'd leave. I lied. But detective, the way he said it, this isn't some angry husband making empty threats. Derek Holloway has been planning our destruction down to the smallest detail, and he's enjoying every minute of it. Santiago stood up, his decision made. I'm getting a warrant to search the Holloway house. In the meantime, I'm putting you in protective custody. You don't understand, Reed said desperately. Derek's not just some vengeful husband. He's a businessman who understands systems and logistics. He's had months to prepare for this. Whatever he's planned, it's already too late to stop it. As if to emphasize Reed's point, Santiago's phone rang. The caller ID showed Derek Holloway's number. Detective Santiago, he answered. Detective, this is Derek Holloway. I'm calling to report that my wife has disappeared. Santiago's grip tightened on the phone. What do you mean disappeared? She checked herself out of the hospital this morning against medical advice. Said she needed some time alone to think about our marriage. She took her car and left. I'm worried about her mental state, the affair, the guilt, the medication. I think she might hurt herself. Mr. Holloway, where are you right now? At home, waiting to see if she comes back. Detective, I need to ask you something. Have you arrested Dr. Morrison yet? Why would we arrest Dr. Morrison? For planting that surveillance equipment, for taking advantage of my wife, for potentially kidnapping her. Surely the evidence points to his involvement. Santiago looked at Reed, who was shaking his head frantically. Mr. Holloway, I'm going to need you to come to the station for further questioning. Of course, detective. I want to do everything I can to help find my wife. Should I come now, or would you prefer to meet at my house? I've been organizing some of Brielle's things, trying to figure out where she might have gone. Stay where you are. I'm coming to you. As Santiago hung up, Reed grabbed his arm again. Don't go alone. Please. Derek's not just dangerous. He's smart. Whatever trap he's set, you're walking right into it. Santiago looked at the terrified surgeon and made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his career. I'm calling SWAT. Whatever Derek Holloway has planned, it ends today. But as Santiago coordinated the response team, he didn't know that Derek had been listening to every word through surveillance equipment he'd planted in the police station months ago. The trap wasn't just closing around Brielle and Reed. It was closing around everyone who tried to interfere with Derek's perfect revenge. In his basement workshop, Derek Holloway smiled as he put the finishing touches on his masterpiece. 20 years of marriage had taught him that the most effective way to destroy someone wasn't with violence. It was with truth, patience, and the careful application of consequences. The reckoning was about to begin, and everyone who betrayed him would face justice, his kind of justice. Chapter 5. The Basement Revelations. The SWAT team surrounded the Holloway house at 3:47 a.m., using the cover of darkness to approach the suburban home that looked like every other house on Maple Street. Santiago crouched behind an armored vehicle, studying the blueprints they'd pulled from city records. Standard two-story colonial, full basement, attached garage. Nothing unusual, except for the recent permit applications for electrical improvements that Derek had filed over the past 6 months. Thermal imaging shows 2 heat signatures in the basement, reported Officer Kim Rodriguez, the team's tech specialist. Both stationary, possibly restrained. Santiago's radio crackled with confirmation from the perimeter teams. All exits secured. Subject's vehicle is in the garage. No signs of recent departure. Remember, Santiago addressed his team. Derek Holloway is highly intelligent and has had months to prepare. Assume every surface is wired. Every approach is anticipated. We go slow, we go careful, and we bring everyone out alive. The entry was textbook perfect. The front door yielded to the breaching ram with minimal noise, and the tactical team flowed through the house like water, clearing each room methodically. The main floor was immaculate, too clean, as if it had been prepared for inspection. No signs of struggle, no indication that anything violent had occurred here. The basement door was steel-reinforced and equipped with multiple deadbolts. It took the team precious minutes to break through, time Santiago knew could mean the difference between rescue and recovery. When they finally breached the basement entrance, what they found defied their worst expectations. Derek Holloway's basement wasn't a prison. It was a theater. The space had been completely transformed into something resembling a courtroom, complete with wooden benches facing a raised platform where Derek sat behind what appeared to be a judge's bench. Spotlights illuminated 2 chairs facing the bench, where Brielle and Reed sat bound but conscious, both wearing what looked like hospital gowns. "Welcome, Detective Santiago," Derek said calmly, not moving from his position. "Right on time. Please, have your men lower their weapons. As you can see, I'm unarmed, and violence would be counterproductive to the proceedings." Santiago kept his service weapon trained on Derek while signaling his team to spread out around the perimeter. "Derek Holloway, you're under arrest for kidnapping, assault, and false imprisonment. Release your hostages immediately." "Hostages?" Derek smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. "Detective, I think you misunderstand the situation. These aren't hostages, they're defendants. And this isn't a kidnapping, it's a trial." Brielle struggled against her restraints, her voice muffled by tape across her mouth. Reed appeared to be drugged, his head lolling as he fought to maintain consciousness. "The trial is over, Derek," Santiago said. "Release them now, and we can work this out." "Oh, but detective, the trial hasn't even begun. You see, I've spent 8 months gathering evidence, documenting crimes, building an airtight case against these 2 defendants. Would you like to see the evidence?" Derek gestured to the walls of the basement, which Santiago now realized were covered with photographs, documents, recordings, and timeline charts. It was the work of someone with unlimited time and obsessive attention to detail. "Exhibit A," Derek announced, pointing to a section of the wall. "Evidence of adultery." 47 photographs of the defendants engaging in intimate contact, 32 hours of recorded conversations, hotel receipts, restaurant bills, even DNA evidence from the defendant's car. Santiago could see his team growing restless, but something about Derek's calm demeanor suggested that rushing him would be a mistake. "Exhibit B," Derek continued. "Evidence of conspiracy to commit fraud. Dr. Morrison falsified medical records to justify Mrs. Holloway's extended hospitalization. He created fake X-rays, coordinated with corrupt radiology technicians, and billed insurance for unnecessary procedures." "That's enough," Santiago said. "Whatever they did, this isn't the way to handle it." "Exhibit C." Derek's voice rose slightly. "Evidence of attempted murder." The basement fell silent except for the hum of the spotlights. "You see, detective, my wife and her lover didn't just plan to run away together. They planned to eliminate the obstacle to their happiness, me. The basement accident wasn't supposed to happen to Brielle. It was supposed to happen to me." Derek stood up from behind his makeshift bench, his movements careful and controlled. 3 weeks ago, Brielle lured me to the basement with a story about hearing strange noises. Dr. Morrison was waiting with a tire iron, planning to make my death look like an accident. But I've been in the auto repair business for 20 years, detective. I know the sound of footsteps on basement stairs, and I know when someone's trying to ambush me. Santiago felt the case reshaping itself again. What happened? I defended myself. Dr. Morrison's attack missed me and struck my wife instead, breaking her leg exactly as the medical records indicate. In the confusion, I subdued Dr. Morrison and, well, let's say I convinced them both that their original plan needed revision. Derek gestured toward Reed, who was slowly becoming more alert. Dr. Morrison agreed to treat my wife's injury and maintain the fiction that she'd fallen accidentally. In exchange, I wouldn't report their attempt on my life. I thought that would be the end of it. But it wasn't, Santiago said, beginning to understand. No, it wasn't. Because even after their murder attempt failed, they continued their affair. They mocked me, detective. They used my mercy as an opportunity to plan another attempt on my life. That's when I realized that some people can't be reformed. They can only be judged. Derek sat back down, his expression becoming judicial again. So I created this court, a place where the truth could be presented, evidence could be examined, and justice could be administered according to the severity of the crimes. Santiago looked at the elaborate setup, realizing that Derek had built more than a courtroom. He'd built an execution chamber. What's the verdict, Derek? The defendants are guilty of adultery, conspiracy, attempted murder, and showing no remorse for their actions. The sentence is death. I can't let that happen. Derek nodded thoughtfully. I understand your position, detective. You represent a legal system that would give these defendants prison time, parole, and eventually freedom to commit similar crimes against other victims. But I represent a different kind of justice, permanent, absolute, and perfectly fitted to the crime. It's murder, Derek. Whatever they did, you can't. Can I? Derek's calm facade finally cracked, revealing the rage beneath. Detective, these people try to kill me. They use my trust, my love, my home as weapons against me. They turn my own basement into a crime scene and my marriage into a lie. Tell me, what punishment would satisfy your legal system? 7 years? 10? With good behavior, they'd be free before they're 50, free to destroy other families, other lives. Santiago realized that Derek wasn't just seeking revenge. He was seeking permanence, a solution that would end the threat forever. There's another way, Santiago said carefully. Let them go, and I'll make sure they face the full consequences of their actions. Attempted murder, insurance fraud, medical malpractice. They'll spend decades in prison. Derek considered this, his expression thoughtful. And what guarantee do I have that your legal system won't fail me as completely as my marriage did? You have my word. Your word. Derek smiled sadly. Detective, I gave my word to these people 20 years ago. I promised to love, honor, and protect them. Look how well that worked out. The basement fell silent again as Derek seemed to weigh his options. Santiago could see his team preparing for multiple scenarios, but he knew that whatever happened next would depend entirely on Derek Holloway's decision. Very well, detective, Derek said finally. I'll accept your offer, but with one condition. What condition? Derek's smile returned, cold and calculating. I want them to confess. Publicly, completely, with no possibility of recanting later. I want the world to know exactly who they are and what they've done. Can your legal system guarantee me that? Santiago nodded, not trusting his voice. He made deals with killers before, but never with someone who seemed so rationally, methodically committed to destruction. Then we have an agreement, Derek said. But detective, remember this moment. Remember that I chose mercy when I could have chosen justice. Because the next time someone betrays me, there won't be any negotiations. As Santiago's team moved to secure the scene and free the captives, he couldn't shake the feeling that Derek Holloway had won something far more valuable than revenge. He'd won the moral high ground, painting himself as the reasonable party in an unreasonable situation. And as Derek was led away in handcuffs, Santiago noticed that the man's expression showed no regret, no anger, no defeat. Only the satisfaction of someone whose carefully laid plans had achieved their intended result. The basement trial was over, but Santiago had the uncomfortable feeling that Derek Holloway's real victory was just beginning. Chapter 6. The truth unveiled. The interrogation room at the precinct had seen countless confessions, but Detective Santiago had never witnessed anything like the systematic destruction of two lives that unfolded over the next 6 hours. Derek Holloway sat across from him with the patience of a man who had already won, while his lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Amanda Torres, took detailed notes. "Let's start with the night of the alleged assault," Santiago began, his recorder running. "Your wife claims you orchestrated her injury." Derek folded his hands calmly. "Detective, I brought evidence that will clarify everything." He nodded to his lawyer, who produced a tablet computer. "Security footage from my auto shop, taken the night of Brielle's injury." The video showed Derek working alone in his shop until 11:47 p.m., then driving directly home. The timestamp showed him arriving at 12:03 a.m., exactly when he called 911 to report Brielle's fall. "Exhibit 2, Amanda Torres said, sliding another tablet across the table. "Hospital security footage from Dr. Morrison's office, taken 2 hours before Mrs. Holloway's injury." Santiago watched Reed and Brielle entering the office together, both carrying duffel bags. They emerged 47 minutes later with Reed carrying what appeared to be medical equipment. "And Exhibit 3, Derek said quietly. Audio recording from that same evening. Brielle's recorded voice filled the room. "You're sure the fracture will look convincing? We can't afford any mistakes." Reed's response was equally clear. "Trust me, I've done this before. One clean break, properly set, and your husband will never question the accident story. The important thing is timing. You have to call 911 exactly 30 minutes after I leave, not before." Santiago felt his understanding of the case collapse completely. They planned the injury together? From the beginning, Derek confirmed. The affair was real, but the accident was elaborate fiction designed to give them unlimited access to each other while I paid for her hospital room. Dr. Morrison would have complete control over her medical care, her medication, her visiting schedule. They could plan their future together while I played the concerned husband. Amanda Torres produced more evidence. Bank records showing Reed had rented a storage unit where they'd been keeping cash and personal belongings, travel documents for fake identities, and email communications between Reed and contacts in Mexico about establishing new medical practice credentials. "But that's not the most damning evidence," Derek continued, showing the real recordings. The tablet displayed conversations between Reed and Brielle from 3 weeks ago, the night before her accident. Their voices were excited, conspiratorial, and chilling. "Brielle, once Derek's gone, we'll have everything. The insurance money, the business assets, his life insurance policy. We'll be set for life." "Reed, you're sure the overdose will look natural? We can't afford an autopsy." "Brielle, trust me, I've been researching this for months. Derek takes blood pressure medication. A simple overdose, combined with alcohol, will look like suicide or accident, especially after discovering his wife's medical crisis and the stress of her long recovery." Santiago stared at the tablet. "They were planning to kill you." "The basement meeting was supposed to be my murder," Derek confirmed. "Brielle was going to lure me downstairs with a story about hearing intruders. Reed would be waiting with a tire iron and my own blood pressure pills. The plan was to knock me unconscious, force the overdose, and stage it as either suicide or accidental death." "What went wrong?" Derek's expression remained neutral. "I'm a careful man, detective. 20 years of marriage to someone like Brielle teaches you to verify everything. I've been monitoring their communications for weeks, so I knew about the plan. I went to the basement prepared. Prepared how? With evidence of their conspiracy and a counter-proposal. I offered them a choice: face murder charges immediately or accept a different arrangement." Amanda Torres slid another document across the table. Signed confession from both parties, acknowledging their intent to commit murder and agreeing to participate in an alternative justice arrangement. Santiago read the document with growing disbelief. Reed and Brielle had both signed detailed confessions to conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, and medical malpractice in exchange for Derek's agreement not to report them immediately to authorities. "The basement court was their idea," Derek continued. They asked for the opportunity to present their case, to explain their actions, to ask for mercy. I agreed on the condition that everything be recorded and that they accept whatever judgment was rendered. And the kidnapping charges? Detective, both defendants came to my house voluntarily. Dr. Morrison arrived first, then my wife. They were not restrained until they attempted to flee after confessing to additional crimes during the proceedings. Santiago reviewed the timeline, trying to find holes in Derek's story. Everything was documented, recorded, witnessed by multiple cameras. Even the basement courtroom setup had been constructed with input from both Reed and Brielle, according to the evidence. What about the surveillance equipment found in the hospital? Derek smiled slightly. Planted by Dr. Morrison himself, as insurance against my wife in case she tried to back out of their arrangement. When their murder plan failed, he needed leverage to keep her committed to their escape plan. Amanda Torres produced Reed's signed statement confirming this, along with receipts for the surveillance equipment and testimony from the electronics store clerk who'd sold it to him. My client, she said formally, has been the victim of a sophisticated conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and theft. Everything he's done has been in service of gathering evidence and protecting himself from further attempts on his life. Santiago felt like he was drowning in documentation. Every accusation had been anticipated, every piece of evidence had been preserved, every legal angle had been covered. Derek Holloway hadn't just defended himself. He'd built an impenetrable case against his attackers. The district attorney is going to want to interview the other parties, Santiago said finally. Of course, Derek agreed. Though, I should mention that Dr. Morrison has already agreed to plead guilty to all charges in exchange for testifying against my wife. He's provided additional evidence of her role in planning my murder, including details about previous attempts that I hadn't discovered. Previous attempts. Amanda Torres produced more files. Brake tampering on Mr. Holloway's work truck 6 months ago, which he attributed to equipment failure. A gas leak in the house 4 months ago, which he attributed to an aging water heater. Food poisoning 3 months ago, which he attributed to bad restaurant food. Dr. Morrison has provided evidence that Mrs. Holloway was responsible for all 3 incidents. Santiago stared at the mountain of evidence, realizing that Derek Holloway had been under siege for months without fully realizing it. The basement confrontation hadn't been his first victory. It had been his final one. What happens now? Santiago asked. Derek's expression became almost sad. Now, detective, justice takes its course. My wife and her lover will face the consequences of their actions through the legal system they claim to respect. I will rebuild my life with the knowledge that the threats against me have been permanently eliminated. And your son? For the first time, Derek's composure wavered slightly. Connor will learn the truth about his mother in age-appropriate ways, with professional counseling support. He'll understand that some people make choices that hurt the people who love them, and that actions have consequences. As Santiago concluded the interview, he realized that Derek Holloway had achieved something remarkable, complete victory over his enemies while maintaining the moral high ground. Every move had been calculated. Every response had been proportional. Every action had been legally defensible. Derek wasn't just getting revenge on his wife and her lover. He was getting justice, and he was getting it through the very system they tried to use against him. The truth had been unveiled, and it was more devastating than any violence could have been. Chapter 7. The Perfect Judgment. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity as the trial of Brielle Holloway and Dr. Reed Morrison became the most sensational case in the county's history. Media attention had been intense from the moment Derek's evidence became public, turning what should have been a simple adultery case into a complex web of attempted murder, insurance fraud, and medical malpractice. District Attorney Patricia Morse had initially been skeptical of Derek's claims, but the overwhelming evidence had forced her hand. The case against Brielle and Reed was so airtight that both defendants had ultimately agreed to plea bargains rather than face trial. Derek sat in the front row, wearing a simple black suit, his expression calm and attentive. Beside him sat Connor, now 13 and old enough to understand the basics of what had happened to his family. The boy had aged visibly over the past months, But Derek had been careful to shield him from the worst details while ensuring he understood the importance of truth and justice. Your Honor, D.A. Morse addressed Judge Catherine Walsh. The state has reached plea agreements with both defendants. Mrs. Holloway has agreed to plead guilty to conspiracy to commit murder in the first degree, insurance fraud, and perjury. Dr. Morrison has agreed to plead guilty to conspiracy to commit murder, medical malpractice, insurance fraud, and violation of professional ethics. Judge Walsh, a stern woman in her 60s who presided over countless domestic cases, reviewed the plea agreements with obvious distaste. These are serious charges with serious consequences. Mrs. Holloway, do you understand that your plea agreement calls for a sentence of 25 years without possibility of parole? Brielle stood beside her attorney, her appearance dramatically different from the confident woman who'd manipulated both her husband and her lover. Prison had already aged her, and the weight of public condemnation had broken her spirit visibly. I understand, Your Honor, she said quietly. Dr. Morrison, your agreement calls for 20 years without parole, plus forfeiture of your medical license and exclusion from ever practicing medicine again. Do you understand these terms? Reed nodded, unable to speak. The man who'd once been confident enough to perform complex surgeries now looked broken and defeated. Before I accept these pleas, Judge Walsh continued, I want to address the victims in this case. Mr. Holloway, would you like to make a statement? Derek stood slowly, his movements precise and controlled. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute conviction. Your Honor, 8 months ago, I believed I had a loving wife and a stable family. I trusted the people closest to me, supported them, and tried to build a life based on honesty and mutual respect. What I discovered was that trust is a luxury that can be weaponized against you by people who view love as weakness and loyalty as stupidity. He turned to look directly at Brielle and Reed. These defendants didn't just betray me. They tried to murder me. Not in a moment of passion, not in self-defense, but as part of a calculated plan to steal my life, my assets, and my son's future. They turned my home into a crime scene, my marriage into a lie, and my trust into a weapon against me. Derek's voice remained steady, but his words carried an edge of cold fury. I've learned that some people are incapable of redemption. They don't feel genuine remorse. They only regret getting caught. They don't seek forgiveness. They seek new opportunities to commit the same crimes against new victims. He paused, letting his words sink in. Your Honor, I don't seek vengeance. I seek permanence. I want these defendants removed from society so they can never again use trust as a weapon or love as a target. I want them to serve every day of their sentences in conditions that remind them daily of the consequences of their choices. Judge Walsh nodded solemnly. Mr. Holloway, your statement reflects remarkable restraint given what you've endured. The court recognizes that you could have taken justice into your own hands, but chose instead to work within the legal system. Derek returned to his seat, placing a protective hand on Connor's shoulder. The boy had remained silent throughout the proceedings, but Derek could see the impact of watching his mother being sentenced to life in prison. Mrs. Holloway, Judge Walsh addressed Brielle directly. I've reviewed the evidence in this case, and I'm struck by the calculated cruelty of your actions. You didn't just plan to murder your husband. You planned to do it while he was caring for you after what he believed was your accidental injury. You exploited his love, his trust, and his natural desire to protect you. Brielle began to cry, but Judge Walsh continued without sympathy. You involve your son in this deception, forcing him to witness your fake recovery while you planned his father's death. You corrupted a medical professional, turning him into an accomplice in fraud and attempted murder. And when your original plan failed, you showed no remorse. You simply planned to try again. The judge's voice grew colder. In 25 years of family court, I've never seen such systematic betrayal of trust. I accept your plea agreement, but I want you to understand that you will never again have the opportunity to destroy another family. She turned to Reed. Dr. Morrison, you took an oath to do no harm, but you used your medical knowledge and professional position to enable attempted murder. You falsified records, created fake injuries, and corrupted the trust that patients place in medical professionals. Your actions don't just harm Mr. Holloway. They harm every patient who depends on medical professionals to act ethically. Reed's lawyer attempted to speak, but Judge Walsh cut him off. The sentences I'm imposing today reflect not just the crimes you committed, but the trust you violated and the lives you destroyed. Mrs. Holloway, 25 years to life. Dr. Morrison, 20 years without parole. Bailiff, please remand the defendants into custody. As Brielle and Reed were led away in shackles, Derek felt Connor's hand slip into his. The boy was crying quietly, mourning not just his mother's imprisonment, but the death of his childhood innocence. "Is it over, Dad?" Connor whispered. Derek looked at his son, the only innocent victim in the entire situation, and felt a surge of protective love that dwarfed any satisfaction he might have felt at his enemy's defeat. "Yes, son, it's over." But even as Derek comforted his child, he knew that the victory was incomplete. Brielle and Reed would spend decades in prison, but they would eventually be released. They would have opportunities to start over, to build new lives, potentially to hurt new people. The legal system had given him justice, but it hadn't given him permanence. As they left the courthouse, Derek's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Congratulations on your victory. Some battles, however, require more permanent solutions. If you're ever interested in ensuring your enemies never threaten anyone again, we should talk." Derek deleted the message without responding, but he didn't forget it. The legal system had served its purpose, but Derek Holloway was a man who believed in comprehensive solutions to long-term problems. The perfect judgment had been rendered, but Derek's war against betrayal was far from over. Some lessons he'd learned needed to be taught more than once to be truly understood. And some teachers never forgot their most important students. Chapter 8, The Reckoning Shadow. 6 months after the trial, Derek Holloway had rebuilt his life with the same methodical precision he applied to engine repair. The auto shops were thriving, Connor was excelling in therapy and school, and the media attention had finally died down. To outside observers, Derek had achieved the perfect recovery from devastating betrayal. But Derek knew that true security required more than legal victories. The anonymous text messages had continued sporadically, always from different numbers, always offering permanent solutions to Derek's ongoing security concerns. Derek had researched enough to know that such services existed, networks of professionals who specialized in problems that couldn't be solved through conventional means. On a cold Tuesday evening, Derek finally responded to one of the messages. The meeting took place in a diner off Interstate 75, chosen for its anonymity and distance from Derek's usual haunts. The man who slid into the booth across from him looked disappointingly ordinary. Middle-aged, slightly overweight, wearing a maintenance worker's uniform that made him invisible in any crowd. "Mr. Holloway," the man said quietly. "I'm Frank. I understand you have concerns about long-term security." Derek studied Frank carefully. "I have concerns about unfinished business. Prison sentences aren't permanent enough for your tastes. Mrs. Holloway will be eligible for parole in 15 years with good behavior. Dr. Morrison in 12 years. They'll be in their 50s, plenty of time to start over, potentially to hurt other people." Frank nodded understanding. "And you want to ensure that doesn't happen?" "I want to ensure permanence." Frank slid a tablet across the table, showing what appeared to be medical records. "Mrs. Holloway has been having adjustment difficulties in prison. Multiple disciplinary infractions, conflicts with other inmates, what the psychiatrists are calling deteriorating mental health. It would be very unfortunate if her condition led to a tragic incident." Derek examined the records, noting the professional quality of the documentation. "What kind of incident?" "Prison suicide. Very common among inmates serving long sentences, particularly those from privileged backgrounds who struggle with institutional life. The statistics are quite sobering." "And Dr. Morrison?" Frank produced another set of files. "Medical malpractice has made him very unpopular in prison. Other inmates don't appreciate doctors who hurt people for money. It would be unfortunate if that resentment led to violence." Derek studied both scenarios, appreciating their elegance. No outside involvement, no suspicious circumstances, just the natural consequences of their environments playing out to their logical conclusions. What are you asking for in return? A donation to certain charities through untraceable channels. Consider it insurance against future problems. Derek was about to respond when his phone buzzed with an urgent text from Connor's school. Emergency at school. Call immediately. I need to take this, Derek said, his parental instincts overriding everything else. The call connected him to the school principal, whose voice carried barely controlled panic. Mr. Holloway, Connor's been injured. There was an incident in the parking lot after school. Someone tried to grab him, but he fought back and got away. The attacker fled, but Connor's pretty shaken up. Derek's blood turned to ice. Is he hurt? Bruised and scared, but physically okay. The police are here, and we've called an ambulance as a precaution. You need to get here right away. Derek stood up immediately, his conversation with Frank forgotten. I'm on my way. As he rushed toward his car, Frank called after him. Mr. Holloway, this might not be random. People in prison have friends on the outside. People who might blame you for what happened to their loved ones. Derek turned back, his expression murderous. What are you saying? I'm saying that sometimes our enemies don't wait for parole to continue their war against us. Sometimes they recruit new soldiers to fight battles they can't fight themselves. Derek drove to the school with his mind racing. If Brielle or Reed had somehow orchestrated an attack on Connor, then the legal system's justice had failed completely. His son, the only innocent person in the entire situation, was being targeted because Derek had shown mercy instead of seeking permanent solutions. At the school, Derek found Connor sitting in the nurse's office with a police officer, his young face marked with fear and confusion. The boy ran to his father immediately, clinging to him with desperate relief. Dad, there was a man waiting by my bike. He said Mom sent him to pick me up, but I remembered what you taught me about strangers. When I tried to run, he grabbed me, but I kicked him and screamed until teachers came running. Derek held his son close, feeling rage building inside him like a volcanic eruption. Did he say anything else? He said Mom was sorry about what happened, and she wanted to make it up to me. But Dad, Mom's in prison. How could she send someone? Derek exchanged glances with the police officer, who nodded grimly. We're investigating, but it's possible someone in prison put out word that they wanted your son contacted. It happens more often than people realize. As they drove home, Derek's phone rang. Frank's voice was calm and professional. I heard about the incident at your son's school. I hope he's okay. How did you? I make it my business to know about threats to my clients. Mr. Holloway, this confirms what I've been trying to tell you. Prison sentences don't end wars. They just change the battlefield. Your enemies are still fighting, and now they're targeting your child. Derek pulled into his driveway, his decision crystallizing. What do you need from me? A simple wire transfer. By tomorrow morning, your long-term security concerns will be permanently resolved. That night, Derek sat in Connor's room, watching his son sleep and thinking about the nature of justice. The legal system had given him victory, but hadn't given him peace. His enemies were still capable of reaching out from their cells to threaten the most important person in his world. Derek had tried to be reasonable, to work within the system, to show mercy even to people who'd tried to murder him. But mercy, he now realized, was just another word for incomplete solutions. At 3 a.m., Derek made the wire transfer. 2 days later, the news reports were brief and unremarkable. Brielle Holloway had been found dead in her cell, an apparent suicide by hanging using torn bedsheets. Prison officials expressed regret, but noted that such incidents were unfortunately common among inmates serving long sentences. Dr. Reed Morrison's death was equally mundane, a fight in the prison yard that escalated when other inmates learned about his crimes against patients. He'd been stabbed 17 times with improvised weapons before guards could intervene. Derek felt no satisfaction at their deaths. Only the quiet peace that came with knowing the threats against his family had been permanently eliminated. Connor would never have to fear surprise visits from his mother's accomplices, would never have to worry about revenge from people who blamed him for their imprisonment. The war was finally over, and Derek Holloway had won completely. But as he tucked Connor into bed that night, Derek reflected on the price of absolute victory. He'd learned that love could be weaponized, trust could be fatal, and mercy could be the cruelest choice of all. He'd also learned that some battles couldn't be won through conventional means, and some enemies couldn't be defeated through legal channels. Derek Holloway was no longer the trusting husband who'd believed in the goodness of people. He was something harder, colder, and infinitely more dangerous. A man who understood that the only permanent solution to betrayal was the permanent elimination of betrayers. And if anyone else ever threatened his family, Derek was prepared to apply that lesson again. Chapter 9. The New Foundation. 1 year after the deaths of Brielle and Reed, Derek Holloway stood in the renovated basement of his home, but this time he wasn't alone. Connor, now 14 and showing the early signs of his father's analytical intelligence, helped Derek organize the new... Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Accusation. Isaac Lowe was fixing his fence when Bertha Briggs cornered him. The 60-something woman had always been the neighborhood's self-appointed watchdog, but today her usual nosiness had transformed into something far more sinister. "I know what you did to your child," she hissed, her weathered face twisted with false concern. Isaac straightened up, setting down his hammer. He'd dealt with difficult situations before. 12 years in military intelligence had taught him to stay calm under pressure. "What child? What are you talking about?" "The one crying in your upstairs room. I've called the police." Isaac's blood ran cold. He and his wife Mary had been trying for children for years, but Mary's medical condition made pregnancy impossible. They lived alone in their modest 2-story home on Maple Street, and Isaac knew for certain no child had ever cried in their upstairs room. "Bertha, there is no child in my house," Isaac said evenly, but he could see the trap closing around him. Her eyes held a calculating gleam that didn't match her concerned citizen act. Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Isaac's mind raced. He was a security consultant now, specializing in corporate espionage prevention. His clients trusted him because of his military background and reputation for integrity. A child abuse accusation would destroy everything he'd built. Detective Jeffrey Abbott arrived with 2 patrol officers. Isaac had seen Abbott around town, but never spoken to him. The detective was younger than expected, maybe early 30s, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Mr. Lowe, we've received reports of a child in distress at this residence," Abbott said professionally. "Detective, I can assure you there are no children in my home. You're welcome to search." As they entered, Isaac noticed Bertha lingering on the sidewalk, watching intently. Something about her posture struck him as wrong. She seemed less concerned about a child's welfare and more focused on his reaction. The officers methodically searched the ground floor while Isaac waited in his living room, studying the framed photos of his military service. His commendations for intelligence work reminded him that puzzles always had solutions, even when they seemed impossible. "Mr. Lowe," Abbott called from upstairs, his voice tight. "You need to see this." Isaac climbed the stairs with growing dread. In his spare bedroom, the room he and Mary had hoped would become a nursery, Abbott stood beside the closet. The door was open, revealing something that made Isaac's stomach lurch. Dozens of children's belongings were stacked inside. Toys, clothes, shoes, even a small backpack. But these weren't new items waiting for a future child. They were worn, used, each piece tagged with what looked like identification numbers. "I've never seen any of this before," Isaac said, but even to his own ears it sounded weak. Abbott photographed everything while the patrol officers exchanged meaningful glances. Isaac's mind worked furiously. Someone had planted this evidence, but when? How? "Mr. Lowe, I need you to come with us for questioning," Abbott said. As they led him outside, Isaac saw Bertha Briggs watching from her porch, and for just a moment, her mask slipped. Instead of concern or satisfaction, her expression showed something else entirely: fear. She was terrified, and Isaac realized she wasn't the mastermind behind this. She was just another pawn. The real question was who was pulling her strings, and why they wanted Isaac destroyed. Chapter 2. The Setup Unravels. The interrogation room at Millbrook Police Station was deliberately uncomfortable. Hard chairs, fluorescent lighting, and the persistent smell of burnt coffee. Isaac had been here for 3 hours, and Detective Abbott had methodically gone through the same questions multiple times. "Let's try this again, Mr. Lowe. How do you explain the children's items in your home?" Isaac leaned back, calling upon every interrogation technique he'd learned in the military. Stay calm, analyze patterns, find the inconsistencies. "Detective, I've told you, I've never seen those items before today. Someone placed them there. When was the last time you were in that closet?" 2 weeks ago, when my wife asked me to store some winter coats." Isaac paused, remembering. The closet was empty then except for the coats. Abbott made a note. Despite the detective's professional demeanor, Isaac sensed something had shifted in the last hour. The questioning had become less accusatory and more investigative. "Tell me about your relationship with Bertha Briggs." "There is no relationship. She's a neighbor who complains about everything. My fence, my car, the color I painted my house. Today was the first time she's ever accused me of anything serious." "Has she seemed different lately? More agitated than usual?" Isaac considered this. "Actually, yes. The last few weeks, she's been watching my house more intensely. I caught her taking pictures of my yard from her window." Abbott's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then stood abruptly. "I'll be back." Alone in the room, Isaac's training kicked in. He studied everything. The placement of the camera, the acoustic tiles that might hide recording equipment, even the coffee stains on the table that could indicate how often this room was used. Most importantly, he analyzed what he'd observed about Abbott's behavior. The detective returned 20 minutes later with a different energy entirely. He sat down and leaned forward, his official mask slipping slightly. "Mr. Lowe, I need to ask you something off the record. In your military intelligence work, did you ever deal with human trafficking cases?" Isaac's pulse quickened. "Occasionally." "Why?" "Because those items in your closet, they don't match any missing children reports in our system. But they do match evidence from a human trafficking case that went cold 18 months ago." The pieces began clicking into place. Isaac's security consulting business had recently taken on several high-profile clients, including a major hotel chain that had been having problems with criminal activity on their properties. His recommendations had resulted in the arrest of several traffickers. "Someone's trying to frame me," Isaac said. Abbott nodded slowly. "That's what I'm starting to think. But here's the problem. We still have to process this by the book. The evidence is real, even if it was planted. And there are people in this department who won't look past the obvious." "What kind of people?" "The kind who might be getting paid to not look too closely at certain crimes." Abbott checked his watch. "I can hold off on formal charges for now, but you need to find out who did this and why. Because if this goes to trial, your military service won't save you." Isaac was released on his own recognizance 2 hours later. The late afternoon sun felt different now. Everything looked the same, but his world had fundamentally shifted. His neighbor's glances lingered too long, and he noticed curtains twitching as he walked to his car. Mary was waiting for him at home, her face pale but determined. Dr. Mary Thompson had always been the calm in any storm, and even now she radiated the quiet strength that had first attracted him to her. "How bad is it?" she asked. "Bad, but not hopeless." Isaac pulled her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. "Someone's playing a very sophisticated game, and they made one crucial mistake." "What's that?" "They picked the wrong target. Whoever did this doesn't know what I'm capable of when someone threatens my family." That evening, Isaac stood in his home office, surrounded by monitors and communication equipment left over from his consulting work. He began pulling up files, making calls to old contacts, and mapping out what he knew. Bertha Briggs was the key. Her behavior suggested she was being coerced, which meant someone had leverage over her. Isaac smiled grimly. Finding leverage was what he did best. By midnight, he had the beginnings of a plan. It would be risky, potentially illegal, and definitely satisfying. But first, he needed to understand exactly who he was fighting. The game had begun, and Isaac Lowe intended to win. Chapter 3: Gathering Intelligence. Isaac's first stop the next morning was Millbrook Public Library, an institution that still maintained physical records alongside digital ones. Librarian Roseday had been there for 30 years and knew every family's history. "Isaac, I heard about yesterday. What a terrible misunderstanding," Rose said, her voice carrying just the right note of sympathy mixed with curiosity. "Thanks, Rose. Actually, I'm hoping you might help me understand something. I'm trying to learn more about my neighbor Bertha Briggs. Has she always lived alone?" Rose glanced around conspiratorially. "Oh, Bertha's had quite the life. She moved here 5 years ago after her husband died. But before that," she leaned closer, "she lived in Riverside County, where she worked for Child Protective Services." Isaac's blood chilled. A CPS worker would know exactly how to manipulate evidence and create believable accusations. Did she retire from there? That's the interesting part. She took early retirement very suddenly. Some folks said there was trouble, but nothing official was ever announced. After leaving the library, Isaac drove to Riverside County. His military contacts included Oliver Holt, who now worked private security and owed Isaac several favors. They met at a diner outside the county seat. Oliver looked like what he was, a former Special Forces operator who transitioned to civilian work but never lost his edge. At 45, he was still intimidating enough to end conversations just by walking into a room. "Isaac, you look like hell," Oliver said, sliding into the booth. "I'm being framed for child abuse by a former CPS worker. I need to know why." Oliver's expression darkened. "Give me everything." Isaac laid out the timeline. His recent cases, Bertha's accusation, the planted evidence, and Abbott's revelation about the trafficking connection. Oliver listened without interruption, occasionally making notes on his phone. "Your instincts are right," Oliver finally said. "This is too coordinated to be random. Someone with resources and connections is behind this. Can you look into Bertha's time with CPS?" "Already on it. But Isaac, if this connects to human trafficking, you're dealing with people who kill to protect their operations. You need backup. What do you recommend?" Oliver smiled, and it wasn't pleasant. "I recommend we find out who's pulling the strings and make them regret targeting you." That afternoon, Isaac returned home to find Mary researching legal strategies. She'd spread case files across their dining room table, her medical training evident in how systematically she approached the problem. "I've been reading about wrongful prosecution cases," she said. "If we can prove the evidence was planted, we have grounds for a civil suit. But we need to identify who did it. Working on that." Isaac showed her what he'd learned about Bertha's background. There's definitely more to this story. Mary studied the timeline he'd created. "Isaac, look at this. The trafficking case Abbott mentioned went cold 18 months ago. That's exactly when you started taking on those hotel security contracts. You think my work disrupted their operation? I think you cost someone a lot of money, and now they want you neutralized." That evening, Oliver called with preliminary findings. Bertha Briggs left CPS after an internal investigation. No charges filed, but there were allegations she'd been taking bribes to falsify reports. Bribes from whom? That's where it gets interesting. The investigation pointed toward a network of people involved in illegal adoptions. Children would be removed from homes based on false reports, then disappear into private adoptions for wealthy clients. Isaac felt pieces clicking into place. So she knows how to work the system. Gets better. Guess who was rumored to be the money man behind the operation? Tell me. Willie Daniel, local city councilman, owns several businesses in Millbrook. Real estate, mostly, but also has interests in consulting services. Isaac recognized the name. Daniel had been in the news recently for his charitable work with at-risk youth. The irony was sickening. "Oliver, I need everything you can find on Willie Daniel. Financial records, business associates, property holdings, everything. What are you planning?" Isaac looked at Mary, who nodded slightly. They'd been married 8 years, and she could read his intentions perfectly. "I'm planning to give them exactly what they deserve. But first, I need to understand their entire operation. This could get dangerous. It already is dangerous. The difference is now I know who my enemies are." After Oliver hung up, Isaac sat with Mary on their couch, holding her hand as they watched the neighborhood through their living room window. Across the street, Bertha Briggs' house sat dark except for a single light in the kitchen window. She's scared, Mary observed. Look how she keeps checking the locks on her doors. She should be scared, but not of us, of whoever's controlling her. What's our next move? Isaac smiled, and for the first time in 2 days, it was genuine. We turn predator into prey. But carefully, these people have already shown they're willing to destroy lives. I need to make sure we don't give them another chance. As they went to bed, Isaac was already formulating phase 1 of his counterattack. He'd spent years learning how criminal networks operated, and he knew their greatest weakness. They always underestimated their victims. That was about to be a fatal mistake. Chapter 4. The Hunter Becomes Hunted. Isaac began his surveillance of Willie Daniel at dawn, positioning himself in a rented car across from Daniel's real estate office. Years of intelligence work had taught him patience, and today it paid off when he observed Daniel meeting with someone unexpected, Detective Lieutenant Ray Perkins, Jeffrey Abbott's supervisor. The meeting lasted only 10 minutes, but Isaac managed to photograph their interaction through the office window. Perkins handed Daniel an envelope, received what looked like a small package in return, and left through the back exit. Isaac's phone buzzed with a text from Abbott. Need to meet. Urgent. Coffee shop on 3rd Street. Come alone. 20 minutes later, Isaac found Abbott waiting in a corner booth, looking nervous. The detective's usual composure had cracked, revealing someone under significant pressure. We have a problem, Abbott said without preamble. Lieutenant Perkins is pressuring me to file formal charges against you. He says the evidence is overwhelming and the DA's office wants to move quickly. How quickly? Tomorrow morning. Isaac leaned back, processing this information. Jeffrey, what do you know about Ray Perkins? He's been my supervisor for 3 years. Good cop by the book, clean record. Abbott paused. Why? Isaac showed him the photographs from the morning surveillance. Abbott's face went pale as he studied the images. Son of a bitch, he whispered. How long has this been going on? That's what I intend to find out. But first, I need you to buy me some time. Ow! Can you delay the charges for 48 hours? Claim you need to verify the evidence chain of custody or something? Abbott considered this. Maybe. But if Perkins gets suspicious, he'll just assign another detective to the case. Then we need to give him something else to worry about. That afternoon, Isaac met with Oliver Holt at an industrial park outside town. Oliver had brought surveillance equipment and tactical gear, enough to outfit a small military operation. I found your smoking gun, Oliver announced, setting up a laptop. Willie Daniel doesn't just own real estate. He owns the storage facility where the trafficking victims were held 18 months ago. Isaac studied the property records Oliver displayed. The same facility the police never fully investigated, because the investigation was shut down by Ray Perkins, citing lack of evidence. How many people are in on this? At minimum, Daniel, Perkins, and Bertha, but probably others. This kind of operation needs lawyers, judges, social workers, a whole network. Isaac's phone rang. Mary's name appeared on the screen. Isaac, you need to come home now, she said, her voice tight with controlled fear. Bertha Briggs is at our front door, and she's acting very strange. I'm on my way. Don't open the door. Isaac and Oliver reached the house in 15 minutes. Bertha stood on the front porch, pacing and muttering to herself. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. Mrs. Briggs, Isaac called from the sidewalk. Is everything all right? She spun toward him, her eyes wild. They know you're asking questions. They know about the detective helping you. Who knows? The people I work for. They're not happy about the complications. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. You don't understand what you're dealing with. These people, they've killed before. Then why are you here? Because they told me to give you a message. Her hands shook as she pulled a folded paper from her pocket. If you don't plead guilty and take whatever deal they offer, they'll do to your wife what they did to the children. Isaac took the paper, fury building in his chest. The message was typed, untraceable. Stop digging or Dr. Thompson joins our collection permanently. Oliver stepped forward, his presence immediately changing the dynamic. Ma'am, you're going to tell us everything you know about this operation. Right now. Bertha looked between them, clearly terrified. I can't. You don't know what they're capable of. Actually, I do, Isaac said quietly. I've spent my career learning exactly what people like this are capable of. But here's what they don't know about me. He stepped closer to Bertha, and she saw something in his eyes that made her back up against the porch railing. I'm capable of much worse things than they are. And if they threaten my wife again, they're going to discover just how creative I can be. Mary appeared in the doorway. Isaac, bring her inside. She's shaking. Against Isaac's better judgment, they brought Bertha into the living room. Mary, drawing on her medical training, provided tea and created a calming environment. Sometimes the soft approach worked better than intimidation. Bertha, how long have you been working for these people? Mary asked gently. 5 years. Ever since I left Riverside County. Bertha's voice was barely a whisper. They approached me after the CPS investigation, so they could make my problems disappear if I helped them occasionally. What kind of help? At first, just information. Which families were having problems, which children might be removed from homes. Then it got worse. Isaac sat forward. What do you mean worse? They wanted me to create problems, make false reports, plant evidence of abuse, testify in custody hearings. Tears ran down her weathered face. I told myself I was helping children, but I knew better. Why didn't you go to the police? Because they have evidence of what I did. Videos, documents, recordings. If I don't cooperate, I go to prison for the rest of my life. Oliver exchanged a look with Isaac. What about Willie Daniel? What's his role? He's the money man. He finds the buyers, arranges the adoptions, handles the payments. But he's not the boss. Then who is? Bertha's hands shook harder. I don't know his real name. Everyone calls him the patron. He has people everywhere. Police, courts, social services. That's how they knew you were investigating. Isaac stood up, pacing to the window. Outside, the neighborhood looked peaceful, but he now understood it was all an illusion. Predators lived among them, protected by corruption and fear. Bertha, here's what's going to happen, he said, turning back to her. You're going to help us bring down this entire operation. In exchange, I'll make sure you're protected when it's over. They'll kill me. Not if we get them first. Oliver smiled grimly. Isaac's right. We got enough to start dismantling their network. But we need to move fast before they realize how much we know. Isaac looked at his wife, who nodded her agreement. Mary had always supported his dangerous work because she understood that some fights were worth the risk. All right, Isaac said. Time to go hunting. Chapter 5. Setting the Trap. Isaac's plan required precise timing and multiple moving parts. He'd spent the previous evening coordinating with Oliver and Jeffrey Abbott, while Mary worked on keeping Bertha calm and extracting more details about the operation. The first phase targeted Willie Daniel's financial network. Isaac had learned from Bertha that Daniel kept detailed records of all transactions, a necessity for managing payments between buyers and sellers in the trafficking operation. Those records were stored in a safe at his real estate office, along with backup files at his home. Oliver handled the technical aspects, using equipment that officially didn't exist to monitor Daniel's communications and track his movements. By Wednesday morning, they knew Daniel would be at a city council meeting until late afternoon, leaving his office vulnerable. Remember, we need clean evidence, Isaac reminded Abbott as they prepared to execute the break-in. Nothing that can be thrown out of court on technicalities. Abbott looked uncomfortable with the plan's legally gray areas, but the threats against Mary had convinced him that normal procedures wouldn't work. I've got a warrant application ready. Once we find evidence of trafficking, I can make it official retroactively. That's not how warrants work, Oliver pointed out. It is if the evidence prevents imminent harm to potential victims. Isaac appreciated Abbott's willingness to bend rules, but he also knew they'd only get one chance. If Daniel's network realized they were exposed, they'd disappear along with any evidence of their crimes. The real estate office occupied a converted Victorian house on Main Street. Isaac and Oliver entered through the rear door using lockpicks that left no trace of forced entry. The building's old construction worked in their favor. Thick walls dampened sound, and the layout provided multiple escape routes. Daniel's office was on the second floor, decorated with photos of him receiving various civic awards and shaking hands with prominent citizens. Isaac found it nauseating how many people had been fooled by the man's charitable facade. The safe was hidden behind a painting of Millbrook's founding families. Oliver made quick work of the electronic lock using a device that cycled through possible combinations faster than humanly possible. Jesus Christ! Oliver breathed as the safe opened. Inside were dozens of files containing photographs, financial records, and correspondence related to the trafficking operation. Isaac photographed everything with a high-resolution camera, while Oliver downloaded files from Daniel's computer. The scope of the operation was staggering. Over the past 5 years, they'd facilitated the illegal adoption of nearly 50 children, generating millions in revenue. The files showed a sophisticated network extending across 3 states, with corrupt officials at every level of the system. Isaac, look at this, Oliver called from the computer. He'd found encrypted communications between Daniel and someone identified only as TP, presumably the patron. The messages revealed that Isaac's investigation had indeed triggered panic in their organization. More disturbing, they showed plans to eliminate Isaac, Mary, and Detective Abbott as threats to their operation. "We need to get out of here," Isaac said, but as he spoke, they heard voices in the hallway below. Daniel had returned early from the council meeting, and he wasn't alone. Isaac recognized Ray Perkins' voice, along with 2 other men they didn't identify. "Told you this was getting out of hand," Perkins was saying. "The detective's asking too many questions, and now the military guy has outside help." "It's handled," Daniel replied. "The patron has people in place. All 3 of them will be taken care of tonight." Isaac and Oliver exchanged grim looks. They were trapped on the 2nd floor with evidence that could bring down the entire network. But first they had to survive the next few minutes. "Back window," Oliver whispered. Isaac shook his head. The drop was too far, and they'd be exposed crossing the yard. Instead, he pointed to a closet that backed up against the building's old servant stairs, a hidden passage common in Victorian houses. They slipped into the closet just as footsteps approached Daniel's office. Isaac held his breath as the door opened and Daniel entered with his companions. "The safe's still locked," Daniel said with relief. "Must have been paranoia." "Paranoia keeps us alive," replied an unfamiliar voice with a slight accent. "The patron wants the military man eliminated tonight. Make it look like a home invasion." "What about his wife?" "Collateral damage. And the detective dies in a car accident tomorrow morning." Isaac's vision went red. These people were calmly discussing murdering his wife as if she were nothing more than an inconvenience. He started to move, but Oliver grabbed his arm and shook his head slightly. The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, providing crucial intelligence about their immediate plans and the network structure. When the voices finally moved away, Isaac and Oliver waited 15 more minutes before emerging from their hiding spot. "We have to warn Abbott and get Mary to safety," Isaac whispered. They escaped through the servants' stairs, which led to a door in the building's foundation. By the time they reached Isaac's car, both men were focused on one objective: turning the hunters into the hunted. Isaac called Mary first. "Pack a bag and go to your sister's house in Springfield. Don't ask questions, just go. I'll explain later." "Isaac, what's happening?" "They're coming for us tonight. Please, just trust me and go." His second call was to Abbott. "Jeffrey, you need to disappear for the next 24 hours. They're planning to kill you." "What? How do you know?" "Because we just heard them planning it. Can you get somewhere safe?" "My brother's cabin upstate." "But Isaac, if they're moving against us, then it's time to move against them first." Isaac and Oliver drove to a safe house Oliver maintained for situations exactly like this one. The small apartment was equipped with weapons, communications gear, and supplies for an extended siege. "What's the play?" Oliver asked as they reviewed the evidence they gathered. Isaac studied the photographs and documents spread across the table. The network was extensive, but every criminal organization had vulnerabilities. The key was finding the right pressure point. "We're going to do what they least expect," Isaac said. "Instead of running, we're going after the patron tonight." "How?" "We don't even know who he is." Isaac smiled, and it was the expression of a predator who'd finally found his prey. "Actually, we do. Look at the communication patterns and financial flows. There's only one person in this town with the resources and connections to run an operation this sophisticated." Oliver studied the data more carefully, Then his eyes widened as he reached the same conclusion. Son of a bitch. It's been hiding in plain sight. Isaac nodded. Tomorrow morning, Millbrook is going to wake up to a very different world. But first, we need to make sure none of us see tomorrow if the patron has his way. Outside, darkness fell over the town, and somewhere in that darkness, killers were preparing to eliminate the last threats to a trafficking network that had operated with impunity for years. But Isaac Lowe had spent his career hunting people who thought they were untouchable. Tonight, he would remind them that everyone was vulnerable if you knew where to strike. Chapter 6. The Patron Revealed. Isaac and Oliver spent the evening analyzing the evidence and preparing for what Isaac suspected would be the most dangerous night of his life. The files from Daniel's safe painted a clear picture of the trafficking network structure, but more importantly, they revealed the identity of the patron. It makes perfect sense, Oliver said, studying the financial records. He's had access to vulnerable families through his position. He's got the political connections to protect the operation, and he's been publicly advocating for child welfare while privately destroying lives. Isaac stared at a photograph of Judge Henry Sheridan receiving a humanitarian award. Sheridan had been Millbrook's most respected family court judge for 15 years, known for his compassionate handling of custody cases and his charitable work with foster children. In reality, he'd been using his position to identify children who could disappear without causing too much investigation. How many cases has he handled where children were removed from homes based on Bertha's false reports? Isaac asked. At least 30 that we can identify, probably more that were handled through other channels. The scope of the betrayal was staggering. Families had trusted Sheridan with their most precious possessions, and he'd systematically sold their children to wealthy buyers who didn't ask questions about paperwork irregularities. Isaac's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Your wife is safe for now. Come to Millbrook Cemetery, Section 7, midnight. Come alone or she dies. They have Mary, Isaac said, his voice deadly calm. Oliver looked up from the files. That's impossible. She went to her sister's house in Springfield. Isaac called Mary's sister, but the phone went straight to voicemail. A follow-up call to Springfield police confirmed his worst fears. 2 women matching Mary and her sister's descriptions had been taken from a house on Elm Street 3 hours earlier. How did they find her so fast? Oliver asked. Isaac was already moving, checking weapons and gathering equipment. Because Judge Sheridan has access to police databases, court records, everything. He probably knew about Mary's sister before I did. This is obviously a trap. Of course it's a trap, but they made one crucial mistake. What's that? Isaac's expression was colder than Oliver had ever seen it. They assumed I'd come alone. Millbrook Cemetery had been established in 1847, its old section filled with elaborate Victorian monuments and sprawling oak trees that blocked most of the ambient light from town. Section 7 was the oldest part, where the founding families were buried among crumbling headstones and overgrown paths. Isaac approached the cemetery on foot, using night vision equipment to scan for threats. Oliver was positioned on the hilltop overlooking the entire area, equipped with a sniper rifle and communications gear. Detective Abbott waited in a patrol car at the cemetery's main entrance, ready to call for backup once they had Mary safely away from her captors. At exactly midnight, Isaac reached Section 7. A single figure stood among the headstones, Judge Henry Sheridan, looking nothing like the distinguished jurist who appeared in newspaper photos. Tonight, he seemed smaller, more predatory, like a spider waiting in the center of its web. Mr. Lowe, Sheridan called softly. I was beginning to think you wouldn't come. Where's my wife? Safe, for the moment. But that depends entirely on your willingness to be reasonable. Isaac moved closer, noting the positions of at least 3 other men hidden among the monuments. Oliver's voice crackled quietly through his earpiece. I have eyes on 4 hostiles. Mary's not here. What do you want? Isaac asked. Sheridan smiled, and in the darkness it looked like a death's head grin. I want you to understand that you've been fighting forces far beyond your comprehension. This isn't just about Millbrook. We're part of something much larger. A network that steals children and sells them to the highest bidder. A network that provides services to people with specific needs. wealthy couples who can't navigate traditional adoption processes, individuals with particular tastes, researchers who require test subjects. Sheridan's voice carried no shame, only cold calculation. We fulfill demand that would otherwise go underground to far less professional organizations. Isaac fought down the urge to put a bullet in Sheridan's head immediately. He needed information about Mary's location first. Why target me specifically? Because your security recommendations cost us 2 major operations. The hotel chain you consulted for was one of our primary transit points. When they implemented your protocols, it disrupted supply chains we'd spent years establishing. So this was revenge. This was business. You were a problem that needed to be eliminated, along with anyone who might continue your work. Isaac heard Oliver's voice in his earpiece. Movement in the woods behind you. At least 2 more hostiles approaching. The trap was closing, but Isaac had expected this. He'd spent years studying criminal psychology, and people like Sheridan always needed to gloat before they killed. "Judge, you've made one crucial error in your planning," Isaac said. "What's that?" "You assumed I was the only threat you needed to worry about." Isaac dropped to the ground just as Oliver's rifle cracked from the hilltop. One of Sheridan's men fell immediately, followed by the sharp reports of Abbott's sidearm as the detective moved through the cemetery's main entrance, taking out the men who'd been approaching from behind. Sheridan pulled a pistol, but Isaac was already moving. Years of military training took over as he rolled behind a large headstone and returned fire. The judge was skilled with his weapon, but he'd never faced someone with Isaac's combat experience. The firefight lasted less than 3 minutes. When the shooting stopped, Sheridan lay wounded among the headstones, his remaining men either dead or fled into the woods. Isaac knelt beside the judge, pressing the barrel of his pistol against the man's temple. "Where's my wife?" Sheridan coughed, blood speckling his lips. "The old Riverside storage facility. Building 7. But you're too late. If we don't check in by 12:30, they have orders to eliminate all the witnesses." Isaac checked his watch. 12:22. The storage facility was 15 minutes away, even driving at dangerous speeds. "Oliver, did you get that? Already moving to my vehicle. I can make it in 12 minutes. Abbott appeared among the headstones, his weapon drawn. "Is it over?" "Not yet," Isaac replied. "Call for ambulances and backup, then meet us at Riverside Storage. And Jeffrey, bring everything. If Mary and the others are still alive, tonight's the night we end this entire operation." As sirens began wailing in the distance, Isaac looked down at Judge Henry Sheridan. The man who'd spent 15 years destroying families in the name of profit was now facing his own mortality, and the fear in his eyes was more honest than anything he'd said in years. "Judge, I want you to understand something," Isaac said quietly. "You picked the wrong family to threaten, and now you're going to pay for every child you sold, every family you destroyed, and every life you ruined." Sheridan tried to speak, but Isaac was already running toward his car. Mary was still out there, and time was running out. The final confrontation was waiting. Chapter 7. The Rescue. Isaac pushed his car to dangerous speeds through Millbrook's empty streets, Oliver's motorcycle roaring alongside him as they raced toward Riverside Storage. The facility sprawled across 20 acres on the industrial side of town, its dozens of buildings connected by narrow service roads that would provide excellent concealment for Sheridan's remaining associates. Building 7 is in the center of the complex. Oliver's voice crackled through the radio. Multiple exit routes, but also multiple positions for ambushes. Isaac checked his watch. 12:29. They had less than a minute before the deadline, assuming Sheridan had been telling the truth about the timing. In his experience, desperate criminals often lied about such details, but he couldn't risk being wrong. They ditched their vehicles at the facility's main gate and approached on foot. The storage complex was poorly lit, with long shadows between buildings that could hide an army of gunmen. Isaac's night vision equipment revealed movement in at least 3 locations. Too many hostiles to engage directly without risking Mary's safety. "I'm going for Building 7, Isaac whispered into his radio. "You take the high ground and provide overwatch." Oliver was already moving toward a maintenance ladder that led to the roof of Building 3. From there, He'd have sight lines across most of the complex. Isaac moved through the shadows like the ghost he'd been trained to be in military intelligence. His years of fieldwork had taught him to become invisible when necessary, and tonight invisibility meant the difference between saving his wife and losing everything that mattered to him. Building 7 was larger than the others, with loading docks on 3 sides and a single entrance marked with security warnings. Isaac could see light coming from inside, unusual for a storage facility at this hour. More importantly, he could hear voices. Said 12:30, and it's already past that. Someone was arguing. Give it 5 more minutes. The judge is thorough, but he's not always punctual. Isaac circled the building, looking for alternate entry points. A ventilation grate on the north side had been modified with hinges, clearly an emergency escape route. He slipped through it into what appeared to be an unused storage unit. The voices were clearer now, coming from the central area of the building. Isaac counted at least 4 different speakers, all male, all armed based on the metallic sounds accompanying their movements. "Don't like this," one was saying. "Too many things have gone wrong tonight." "Relax," replied a voice Isaac recognized as Willie Daniels. "Sheridan's handled worse situations than this. By morning, our problems will be eliminated and we can get back to business." Isaac peered through a gap in the storage unit's wall and saw the scene that made his blood freeze. Mary was tied to a chair in the center of the open area, conscious but clearly terrified. Her sister Ellen sat beside her in similar restraints. Both women had been beaten, though not severely yet. 4 men stood around them, all armed with pistols. Willie Daniel paced nervously while checking his phone. 2 others Isaac didn't recognize maintained watch positions near the entrance. The 4th, a large man with prison tattoos, seemed to be enjoying the women's fear a little too much. Isaac's training warred with his rage. The smart tactical move was to wait for backup, create a distraction, and engage the hostiles from a position of advantage. But every second of delay meant more trauma for Mary and Ellen. His decision was made when the tattooed man reached toward Mary with clear intention to harm her. Isaac shot him through the wall of the storage unit. The sound of gunfire in the enclosed space was deafening, causing momentary confusion among the remaining hostiles. Isaac used those crucial seconds to burst through the unit's door and engage the next closest target. Military training kicked in completely. Isaac moved with deadly precision, using the storage units as cover while systematically eliminating threats. Willie Daniel tried to use Mary as a human shield, but Isaac's marksmanship training had included hostage scenarios. A single shot took Daniel down without endangering the women. The entire firefight lasted less than 90 seconds. When the echoes faded, Isaac was kneeling beside Mary's chair, cutting through her restraints with hands that shook slightly from adrenaline. "Are you hurt?" he asked, checking her for injuries. "We're okay," Mary said, though her voice was hoarse from stress. "Isaac, there are others. They have children here." "Where?" Ellen spoke up, her voice stronger than Isaac had expected. "Building 12. They brought us here first, and we saw them moving kids into that building." Oliver's voice crackled through the radio. "Isaac, we've got company. 3 vehicles approaching fast from the east entrance." "How long?" 2 minutes, maybe less." Isaac helped Mary and Ellen to their feet. Both women were shaken but mobile. "Can you make it to the fence line?" "Yes," Mary said firmly. "Go get those children." Isaac's heart swelled with pride for his wife's strength, but there wasn't time for sentiment. Building 12 was across the complex, and Sheridan's reinforcements would arrive before he could make the trip on foot. "Oliver, I need a distraction." "On it." Explosions bloomed throughout the storage complex as Oliver began detonating charges he'd placed during his approach. The diversions would confuse the incoming hostiles and provide cover for Isaac's movement. Building 12 was locked with electronic security, but Isaac's equipment made quick work of it. Inside, he found something that would haunt his dreams forever. 24 children ranging in age from toddlers to teenagers, all showing signs of prolonged confinement and trauma. "It's okay," Isaac called out, raising his hands to show he wasn't armed. "I'm here to help. We're getting you out of here." The older children had clearly been conditioned to fear adults, but desperation overcame caution when they heard gunfire approaching the building. Isaac began leading them toward the exit, carrying two of the smaller ones who couldn't walk fast enough. Abbott's police sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder as backup finally arrived. Isaac emerged from Building 12 to find Oliver providing covering fire from his rooftop position, while Sheridan's reinforcements took defensive positions around the complex. This way, Isaac shouted to the children, leading them toward a break in the perimeter fence that Oliver had created with his explosives. The sight that greeted police and paramedics would become the stuff of legend in Millbrook. Isaac Lowe walking through smoke and chaos with nearly 24 rescued children, his wife and sister-in-law helping to guide the traumatized victims to safety, while his military friend provided precision fire support against the remaining criminals. But even as ambulances arrived and began treating the children, Isaac knew the night wasn't over. They'd rescued the victims and eliminated most of the network soldiers, but the corruption ran deeper than just Sheridan and his immediate associates. Jeffrey, Isaac called to Abbott as the detective coordinated the crime scene. We need to move fast on the rest of the network. Once word gets out about tonight, the others will disappear. Abbott nodded grimly. I've already called the state police and FBI. With the evidence you gathered and the children as witnesses, we can roll up everyone connected to this operation. Isaac looked around at the devastation of the storage complex, then at Mary as she comforted a crying child. His wife caught his eye and nodded slightly. The same look of determination that had carried them through 8 years of marriage and would carry them through whatever came next. The network that had terrorized children and destroyed families for years was finally broken. But Isaac's work wasn't finished until every person involved faced justice. Tomorrow would bring arrests, trials, and a long process of healing for the victims. Tonight, Isaac Lowe had done what he'd sworn to do: protect his family and make his enemies pay for their crimes. But he had one more gift for those who'd threatened the woman he loved. Chapter 8. Justice and Reckoning. The next 72 hours transformed Millbrook from a quiet suburban town into the center of a federal investigation. FBI agents swarmed through the storage facility, Daniel's real estate office, and Judge Sheridan's chambers, collecting evidence of what prosecutors would later call the most extensive child trafficking operation uncovered in the region's history. Isaac spent most of that time in debriefings, walking federal agents through the evidence he and Oliver had gathered. The military precision of their investigation impressed even seasoned FBI professionals, though Isaac noticed some discomfort with the irregular methods they'd employed. Mr. Lowe, Special Agent Candace Hendricks said during their final interview, "Your background obviously prepared you well for this type of investigation. But some of your actions, the break-ins, the surveillance without warrants, the armed confrontations, they create complications for prosecution." Isaac leaned back in his chair, studying the agent across the table. "Special Agent Hendricks, with respect, your by-the-book approach would have resulted in the deaths of my wife, 24 children, and at least 1 police officer. Sometimes complications are preferable to body bags. Nevertheless, defense attorneys will challenge evidence obtained through illegal means. Then I guess you'll have to be very creative about explaining how you obtained it." Detective Abbott, who'd been largely silent during the debriefing, finally spoke up. "Agent Hendricks, Isaac's evidence led us to identify over 40 victims across 3 states. We've got confessions from 3 network members, financial records going back 5 years, and testimony from children who can identify their captors. Any decent prosecutor can make this case without worrying about search warrant technicalities." Hendricks nodded reluctantly. The scope of the investigation had indeed provided overwhelming evidence of criminal activity, much of it directly admissible regardless of how the initial intelligence was gathered. "What about Judge Sheridan?" Isaac asked. "He's cooperating fully. Facing life in prison tends to make people talkative." Hendricks consulted her notes. "He's provided information about network operations in 7 other states. This case is going to trigger investigations across the entire region." Isaac felt a grim satisfaction. Sheridan's network had operated for years by maintaining secrecy and exploiting corruption. Now their own records would be used to dismantle similar operations throughout the country. That evening, Isaac returned home for the first time since the confrontation at the cemetery. Mary was in the kitchen, cooking dinner as if nothing had happened. But Isaac noticed subtle changes. The way she positioned herself to see all the entrances, the tactical pen on the counter within easy reach, the slight tension in her shoulders that spoke of someone who'd experienced real danger and would never feel completely safe again. "How are you handling all this?" he asked, pulling her into his arms. "Better than I expected," she said, leaning into his embrace. "The children at the hospital are responding well to treatment. Physical trauma heals faster than psychological damage, but they're resilient." Isaac had visited the rescued children at Millbrook General, where Mary and her medical colleagues were overseeing their care. The sight of those young faces, some defiant, some terrified, all bearing the invisible scars of their ordeal, had reinforced his conviction that their actions had been not just justified but necessary. "Any word on permanent placements?" he asked. "Social services is working on it, but it's complicated. Many of these children were stolen from families who thought they were dead. There will be legal battles over custody, not to mention the trauma of reunification after years of separation." Isaac had been thinking about this problem. The network's files contained detailed records of which children had been taken from which families, but legal proof would take time to establish. Meanwhile, the children needed stability and care. "I've been talking with Oliver about something," he said, "a foundation to provide support for the victims, legal assistance, therapy, financial help for families during the reunification process." Mary pulled back to look at him. "That's a wonderful idea. How would it work?" "Oliver has connections in the private security world, people with resources who understand the importance of protecting children. I have my military contacts. Between us, we can raise significant funding." "And you'd run this foundation?" Isaac shook his head. "You would. You understand the medical and psychological aspects better than anyone. I'd handle the security and investigative side when needed." Mary considered this. "It would mean leaving my practice. Only if you want to. The foundation could be part-time initially, growing as the need becomes clear." They were interrupted by a knock at the door. Isaac tensed automatically. Unexpected visitors had become threatening rather than welcome, but relaxed when he saw Oliver through the peephole. "Hope I'm not interrupting," Oliver said as Isaac let him in. "But I thought you'd want to see this." He handed Isaac a newspaper. The headline read, "Millbrook Trafficking Ring Exposed. Local Heroes Save Children." Below, it was a photo of Isaac carrying one of the rescued toddlers from a storage facility. "You're famous," Oliver said with a grin. Isaac grimaced. "I hate publicity. Too late for that. The story's going national. CNN wants an interview, along with half a dozen other networks." Mary read over Isaac's shoulder. "It's a good article. They focus on the children and the investigation, not sensationalizing the violence." Speaking of the investigation, Oliver continued, "I got a call from Agent Hendricks this afternoon. Seems the FBI is interested in our consulting services for similar cases." "What kind of consulting?" "The kind where government resources aren't sufficient, and they need people with specialized skills and fewer bureaucratic constraints." Isaac understood immediately. Law enforcement agencies often face limitations that prevented them from acting quickly enough to save lives. Private consultants operating in legal gray areas could sometimes accomplish what official investigations could not. "Interesting," Isaac said. "What did you tell her?" "That we consider it on a case-by-case basis." Mary looked between them. "You're talking about making this permanent, aren't you? Hunting people like Sheridan's network." Isaac sat down beside her. "Only if you're comfortable with it. After what we've been through, I understand if you want a quieter life." Mary was silent for a long moment, staring at the newspaper photo. "Isaac, do you know what I kept thinking about while we were tied up in that storage facility?" "What?" "All the other children who went through the same thing, but didn't have someone like you willing to fight for them." She looked up at him with the fierce determination he'd fallen in love with. "If we can prevent other families from experiencing what we went through, then yes, I'm comfortable with making this permanent." Oliver smiled. In that case, I should mention that Agent Hendricks also said there's a substantial reward for information leading to the conviction of trafficking networks. Between Sheridan's operation and the connected cases they're developing, we're looking at enough money to fund that foundation for years. Isaac felt something settling into place, a sense of purpose that went beyond just seeking justice for his own family. He discovered something during the investigation. He was very good at hunting predators, and the world was full of predators who thought they were untouchable. "All right," he said finally, "but we do this right. Professional standards, legal boundaries where possible, and we never forget that we're fighting for the victims, not for revenge." Mary squeezed his hand. "What do we call this foundation?" Isaac thought about the children's faces at the hospital, the families being reunited after years of separation, and the quiet satisfaction of seeing Judge Sheridan in handcuffs. "The Low Foundation for Child Protection," he said, "because every child deserves someone willing to fight for them." Outside, Millbrook was returning to normal. But for Isaac and Mary Lowe, normal had been redefined forever. They discovered that evil often wore respectable faces and operated from positions of trust. But they'd also discovered that ordinary people could accomplish extraordinary things when protecting those they loved. The foundation would be their way of extending that protection to children who had no one else to fight for them. And Isaac Lowe was just getting started. Chapter 9. New Beginnings. 6 months after the destruction of Judge Sheridan's trafficking network, Isaac stood in the offices of the Lowe Foundation for Child Protection, reviewing case files that had arrived from law enforcement agencies across the country. The Foundation's success in reuniting families and supporting trafficking victims had generated requests for assistance that far exceeded their current capacity. "We need more staff," Mary said, entering the office with coffee and a stack of medical reports. "The therapy program alone requires 3 more counselors, and that's just to handle current cases." Isaac nodded, studying a map on the wall marked with pins representing active investigations. Red pins indicated confirmed trafficking operations, yellow pins showed suspected networks, and green pins marked successful interventions. The map looked like a war zone, which in many ways it was. "Oliver's bringing in 2 more investigators next month," Isaac said, "both former military with specialized training. And Agent Hendricks says the FBI wants to expand our consulting contract. Can we handle the expansion? We'll have to. Look at these numbers." Isaac showed her the latest statistics. Since Sheridan's arrest, his cooperation has led to the identification of 43 connected operations across 12 states. Each network we dismantle creates new cases, new victims who need support. Mary settled into her chair, reviewing the medical files she'd brought. "The good news is that recovery rates are higher than expected. Children are resilient, especially when they receive proper care and have family support." Isaac smiled at the pride in her voice. Mary had thrown herself into the Foundation's work with the same dedication she'd brought to her medical practice. Her combination of clinical expertise and personal experience with trauma made her uniquely qualified to develop treatment protocols for trafficking victims. The door opened and Detective Abbott entered, followed by a woman Isaac didn't recognize. "Isaac, Mary, I'd like you to meet District Attorney Melissa Howe. She's prosecuting the Sheridan case and wanted to discuss some developments." Howe was younger than Isaac had expected, but carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to high-stakes litigation. She shook hands professionally before taking a seat at their conference table. "Mr. and Mrs. Lowe, first let me say that your work on this case has been exemplary. Without your investigation, we never would have uncovered the full scope of the network." "Thank you," Isaac said. "What can we do for you?" Judge Sheridan's trial begins next month, and his defense team is mounting an aggressive challenge to the evidence. They're claiming that most of our case is based on illegally obtained materials. Mary leaned forward. "What does that mean for the prosecution?" "It means we need your testimony to establish how the evidence was discovered. The jury needs to understand that you were acting as concerned citizens protecting your family, not as vigilantes seeking revenge." Isaac considered this. "Ms. Howe, with respect, we were seeking revenge. The difference is that we channeled it constructively." That's exactly the wrong thing to say in court, Abbott warned. But it's the truth. And juries appreciate honesty. Isaac turned to the prosecutor. Ms. Howe, what's your real concern here? My real concern is that Sheridan's lawyers will portray you as dangerous individuals who used illegal methods to frame an innocent man. They're going to argue that everything you discovered was planted or fabricated. Then you need to focus on the children's testimony. 24 victims who can identify their captors and describe their experiences. That's not fabricated evidence. Howe nodded. You're right, but the defense will claim the children were coached or that their trauma makes their testimony unreliable. Your investigation provides the corroborating evidence that proves their stories are true. Mary spoke up. What do you need from us? Complete transparency about your methods and motives. If the jury understands that you were fighting to save your wife and other victims, they'll forgive the irregular procedures. Isaac and Mary exchanged glances. They discussed this possibility extensively, that their actions during the investigation would be scrutinized in court and potentially criticized by people who never faced similar threats. Ms. Howe will testify truthfully about everything we did and why we did it, Isaac said finally. But we won't apologize for saving lives. I wouldn't ask you to. After Howe and Abbott left, Isaac and Mary sat in silence for several minutes, each lost in their own thoughts about the upcoming trial. Are you ready for this? Mary asked eventually. To testify? Yes. To watch Sheridan's lawyers try to make us look like the criminals? That'll be harder. Isaac, what we did wasn't just right. It was necessary. Without our investigation, those children would still be imprisoned, and other children would have joined them. Isaac nodded, but he was thinking beyond the trial. Mary, I want to show you something. He led her to a locked filing cabinet and withdrew a folder marked Project Sanctuary. What's this? A proposal I've been developing with Oliver and some of our military contacts. A training program for law enforcement and private investigators focused on trafficking cases. Mary read through the proposal, her eyebrows rising as she absorbed the details. Isaac, this is massive. You're talking about creating a national network of specialists. Trafficking networks are highly organized and well-funded. They have sophisticated methods and international connections. Law enforcement agencies need comparable expertise to fight them effectively. And you want to provide that expertise. I want to ensure that what happened to us and to those children never happens to another family. Mary closed the folder and looked at him with the expression that had captured his heart 8 years earlier. When do we start? The trial of Judge Henry Sheridan began on a cold Monday morning in February. Isaac and Mary arrived at the courthouse to find media crews and protesters gathered on the steps. Signs reading Justice for Children competed with others proclaiming due process matters. Inside, the courtroom was packed with spectators, including many of the families whose children had been victims of Sheridan's network. Isaac noticed that several of the rescued children, now healthier and showing signs of recovery, sat with their families in the gallery. Sheridan looked smaller than Isaac remembered, diminished by months in custody and the weight of overwhelming evidence against him. His legal team was impressive. 3 expensive attorneys who'd built careers defending white-collar criminals. District Attorney Howe's opening statement was masterful, painting a clear picture of the trafficking network while acknowledging the unconventional methods used to expose it. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you will hear evidence of crimes so heinous that they challenge our faith in human decency. You will also hear criticism of the investigation that brought these crimes to light. I ask you to remember that sometimes heroes don't wear uniforms, and sometimes justice requires ordinary citizens to take extraordinary risks. When Isaac was called to testify, he walked to the witness stand with the same calm confidence he'd carried into combat zones. The packed courtroom fell silent as he was sworn in. Mr. Lowe, Howe began, please tell the jury what happened on the morning of September 15th when Mrs. Briggs approached you. Isaac told the story simply and clearly, from Bertha's accusation through the discovery of planted evidence to his realization that he was being framed. When he described finding Mary and the children at the storage facility, several jurors were visibly moved. Sheridan's defense attorney, a silver-haired man named Colin Pineda, rose for cross-examination with obvious relish. Mr. Lowe, isn't it true that you broke into my client's office without a warrant? Yes. And that you photographed confidential client files? Yes. You also engaged in surveillance of Judge Sheridan without legal authorization? That's correct. Pineda smiled, clearly expecting Isaac to become defensive. Instead, Isaac remained calm and cooperative. So you admit that you violated numerous laws during your so-called investigation? I admit that I used whatever means necessary to save my wife's life and protect 24 children from continued abuse. Mr. Lowe, do you believe that citizens have the right to take the law into their own hands? Isaac looked directly at the jury. I believe that when the system fails to protect innocent people, good men and women have a responsibility to act. Everything I did was focused on saving lives, not seeking personal gain. But you had no legal authority. Mr. Pineda, I had the authority that every person has when they witness crimes against children. I had the authority of conscience and the responsibility that comes with having the skills to help. The cross-examination continued for 2 hours, but Pineda never managed to shake Isaac's composure or make him appear vindictive. When Mary testified the following day, her medical expertise and obvious compassion for the victims provided powerful support for the prosecution's case. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Judge Sheridan's defense team tried every possible strategy, questioning the evidence, attacking the investigation, even suggesting that their client was being scapegoated by the real criminals. But the testimony of the rescued children was devastating, and the financial records left no room for alternative explanations. The jury deliberated for 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges. Judge Henry Sheridan was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As Isaac and Mary left the courthouse, they were surrounded by reporters shouting questions about their future plans and the foundation's work. Isaac paused on the steps to make a brief statement. Justice was served today, but our work isn't finished. There are other networks, other victims, other families who need protection. The Lowe Foundation will continue fighting for children who have no one else to fight for them. That evening, at a celebration dinner attended by the investigation team and victim families, Isaac received a call from Agent Hendry.